The air in Illinois Corvo was a commodity, bought and paid for by the man in the corner booth. Julian Marchetti owned the quiet. He owned the respectful nods from the staff, the way the maître d' hovered but never intruded, the hushed tones of the other patrons who knew better than to let their laughter stray too far. Tonight, the quiet was particularly valuable. Across from him, two men in suits that were too new, too eager, sweated under the precisely calibrated air conditioning. They were talking about shipping lanes, about unions, about things Julian had controlled before their fathers had learned to shave. He listened. He rarely spoke. His stillness was a weapon, more effective than the pistol tucked into the small of his back or the two men, Marco and Leo, who stood like statues by the kitchen door. His world was a thing of order. A complex machine of favors, threats, and brutal arithmetic. Every piece had its place. Every person had their function. He was the ghost in that machine, the unseen force that ensured the gears turned smoothly. His gaze, dark and unreadable, drifted from the nervous men to the window. The city glittered outside, a sprawling galaxy of lights he had mapped and conquered. He felt nothing for it. Not pride. Not ownership. Just a weary sense of responsibility, the burden of a king who had long forgotten why he wanted the crown in the first place. Then, the machine faltered. A gear slipped. It started as a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. A waitress. New. He hadn't seen her before. She was young, with tired eyes and a tremor in her hand as she refilled a water glass at a nearby table. She moved with a desperation that did not belong in a place like Illinois Corvo, where even the staff were curated for their seamless invisibility. She was a discordant note in his carefully composed symphony. He watched her. He saw the worn-down heels of her sensible black shoes. He saw the faint stain on her crisp white apron, one she had tried to scrub out. He saw the way her shoulders hunched, as if expecting a blow. The two men finished their pitch, their voices trailing off into the silence Julian had created. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "We will consider your proposal." It was a dismissal. They knew it. They scrambled to their feet, relief washing over their faces. As they left, Marco moved to approach the table, ready for the next set of instructions. But he stopped. Because the girl was walking toward them. Toward Julian. Every rule, spoken and unspoken, screamed that this was not allowed. No one approached Julian Marchetti's table uninvited. No one. The maître d' took a panicked step forward, his face pale. Marco's hand went to his jacket, a gesture as natural as breathing. Leo shifted his weight, preparing to intercept. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The girl didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. Her focus was a pinpoint, aimed directly at the man in the corner booth. She walked past the other tables, her cheap shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. She reached his table. She was trembling, a leaf in a storm. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it eclipsed everything else. Julian did not move. He just watched her. He saw the pulse beating frantically in her slender neck. She leaned forward, not like a waitress asking for an order, but like a parishioner giving a confession. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the distant clatter of the kitchen. A whisper meant only for him. "Your mother sent me." The words landed in the silent space between them. They were impossible words. Nonsense. His mother, Isabella, was a ghost of a different sort. A memory encased in amber. A name on a marble headstone in a quiet cemetery. Isabella Marchetti died in 1979. Marco was moving now, his face a mask of cold fury at the breach. He reached for the girl's arm. Julian's hand came up. Palm flat. A simple, silent command. "Stop." Marco froze, his fingers inches from the girl's sleeve. His eyes widened in confusion. He had never seen the boss do that. Never. The world, which had been holding its breath, stopped breathing entirely. Julian's expression, the one that had launched wars and ended them, had vanished. In its place was something no one in that room had ever seen. A crack in the marble. A flicker of a forgotten boy in the eyes of a hardened king. He stared at the girl, this stranger who had spoken the name of his ghost. He looked at her, and for the first time in 30 years, Julian Marchetti was not in control. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will change everything he thought he knew about his past. Like this video, hit subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Julian Marchetti's world had rules. They were not written in law books, but they were more binding than any statute. They were carved into the fabric of the city's underworld with steel and blood. Rule number 1, business is business. Emotion was a liability, a cancer that could rot an empire from the inside out. Rule number 2, stay in your lane. He controlled the major arteries of the city, the ports, the construction unions, the quiet flow of money through unseen channels. He did not involve himself in the petty squabbles of the street. Loan sharks, bookies, corner dealers, they were beneath his notice, insects buzzing in the ecosystem he presided over. Rule number 3, the most absolute of them all, no harm to innocents. Civilians, and especially women and children, were off limits. They were the protected species in his concrete jungle. Violating this rule was not a business misstep. It was a sin. And sins, in Julian's world, were paid for in full. He was a man forged by the breaking of such rules. He was 17 when his mother died. Isabella. Her name was a prayer he no longer knew how to say. She was the source of all the softness he had ever known. Her hands always smelled of flour and yeast. She ran a small bakery in the old neighborhood, a place that was more charity than business. She gave bread to families who couldn't pay. She believed in small kindnesses, in the quiet power of a good deed. The world is hard, Giuliano, she used to say, wiping flour from his cheek. It does not cost us anything to make it a little softer for someone else. Her death was recorded as a hospital accident. A fall. A tragic mistake. But Julian knew better. He knew his father, a man of ambition but no real power, had crossed a line. He had made an enemy of someone who did not follow the same rules. His mother's death was a message. It was the lesson that broke him and remade him. He learned that softness was a vulnerability. Kindness was a weakness. The only way to protect the people you loved was to become so feared, so powerful, that no one would ever dare to send you a message again. So he built his empire on a foundation of cold logic and ruthless efficiency. He became the ghost, a man whose enemies simply ceased to be. He honored his mother's memory not by being soft, but by creating an order so absolute that the kind of random, cruel violence that took her could not touch anyone in his orbit. He had buried the boy who loved the smell of baking bread under 30 years of concrete and steel. Until tonight. Until a terrified girl spoke an impossible sentence. He gestured to the chair opposite him, the one recently vacated by the sweating businessman. Sit. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. The girl, Lena, sank into the chair. She seemed to shrink into the plush leather, a small, fragile thing. Julian waved a hand, dismissing Marco and Leo. Leave us. Marco hesitated, his loyalty warring with his protective instincts. One look from Julian sent him backing away, his confusion plain on his face. They were alone. The restaurant around them might as well have been a million miles away. What is your name? Julian asked. Lena, she whispered. Lena, why did you say that to me? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her pale cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. The words, Julian said, his voice firm but not unkind. Where did you hear them? She took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself. It was my grandmother's story. From her mother. My great-grandmother. Julian waited. The past was a locked room, and this girl was holding a key he never knew existed. My great-grandmother, Sophia, she lived in the old neighborhood. On Mulberry Street. She knew a woman there. A kind woman who owned a bakery. Isabella. The name hung in the air, unspoken. It was a long time ago, Lena continued, her voice gaining a little strength as she retreated into the safety of a family story. My great-grandfather lost his job at the cannery. They had nothing. My grandmother was just a baby, and she was sick. They had no money for a doctor, for medicine. They were going to be evicted. She paused, twisting a corner of her apron in her hands. This woman, from the bakery, she found out. She came to their apartment. She brought bread, and soup, and an envelope with money inside. Enough for the doctor, and the rent, and more. She saved them. Julian's hands were flat on the table. Very still. Very still. My great-grandmother tried to refuse, to ask how she could ever repay her. But the woman just smiled. She said, kindness is not a debt. It's a seed. You plant it, and it grows. It was his mother's phrase. He hadn't heard it in decades, but it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He could almost smell the yeast, feel the warmth of the old bakery kitchen. The woman told her one more thing, Lena said, her eyes fixed on Julian's face, searching for something. She said she had a son, a young boy. She said she hoped he would grow up to be a good man, a strong man. And she said, if you are ever in true trouble, the kind that feels like the end of the world, you find my son. And you tell him his mother sent you. He will remember. The story finished. The echo of a promise made by a hopeful mother 50 years ago filled the silence of the expensive restaurant. A promise she had made for a version of him that ceased to exist the day she died. My grandmother told me that story when I was little, Lena whispered. She said if I was ever scared, I should remember it. Remember that one person's kindness can change everything. Julian finally spoke, his voice raspy. Why are you here, Lena? What is the trouble? The fear crashed back into her eyes. I made a mistake. My sister, she's also named Sophia, after my great-grandmother. She's sick. The insurance didn't cover her medicine. It was so expensive. I got behind on rent. I was desperate. You borrowed money, Julian stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, shamefaced. From who? A man. His name is Sal Rizzo. Julian's eyes narrowed. Sal's the weasel Rizzo. An insect. A bottom feeder who preyed on the desperate, charging obscene interest rates and using standover tactics. A man who operated so far beneath Julian's level that he was nothing more than a name in a file, a minor nuisance in the grand scheme of the city. The interest. I couldn't keep up, Lena choked out. I worked 2 jobs, but it was never enough. The debt just kept getting bigger. He came to the apartment yesterday. He said if I don't have all of it by tomorrow, he's going to take it out on Sophia. Rule number 3. No harm to innocence. Rizzo hadn't just broken a rule. He had desecrated a sacred law. He had put his filthy hands on the legacy of Isabella Marchetti. Julian felt a cold, clean rage settle over him. It was an old, familiar feeling. The feeling that had built his empire. But this time, it was different. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about power or territory. This was personal. He looked at this girl, Lena, with her tired eyes and her grandmother's story. She hadn't come to him because he was a crime boss. She had come to him because his mother, 50 years ago, had planted a seed of hope. And against all odds, in the barren soil of Julian Marchetti's soul, it had just found a place to grow. The internal conflict was a war fought in seconds. One side was the man he had become, cold, pragmatic, ruthless. This was not his problem. This was a street-level issue, a messy, emotional entanglement that had no place in his well-ordered world. Getting involved was a breach of his own protocol. It was a weakness. The other side was the boy he had been. The boy who watched his mother give away bread she couldn't afford to spare. The boy whose entire world had been shattered by a man exactly like Sal Rizzo, a predator who fed on the vulnerable. His mother had believed in him. She had made a promise on his behalf, a promise that he would be a good man. For 30 years, he had failed to keep it. He had become a powerful man, a feared man, but not a good one. Not in the way she meant. He looked at Lena's tear-streaked face, at the raw terror in her eyes. He saw his own mother's kindness reflected in this girl's desperate love for her sister. He saw a chance. Not for redemption. He was long past that. But for something else. A chance to honor a promise. A chance to, just for one night, be the man his mother believed he would become. The war ended. The boy won. Julian reached across the table. He didn't touch her. He simply let his hand rest on the polished wood, a gesture of quiet finality. "The debt is handled," he said. His voice was low, but it held the certainty of a sunrise. "You will not hear from Sal Rizzo again. No one will." Lena stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. "But how? You don't even know how much it is." "The amount does not matter," Julian said. He stood up, the movement fluid and decisive. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed Marco's number. It rang once. Marco. He walked away from the table, toward the restaurant's exit, his back to Lena. His voice dropped even lower, becoming the cold, hard instrument of his will. "Find Sal Rizzo. I want his entire operation. His enforcers, his books, his safe houses. I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, who he speaks to. Dismantle it. I want every person he has ever extorted to have their debts erased by morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Even through the phone, Julian could feel Marco's surprise. "Boss. This is street-level stuff. Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure," Julian replied, his voice like chipping ice. He threatened a child. A sick child. "This is not a business matter, Marco. This is a matter of pest control." He continued walking. "I want a full team. Use the men from the docks. The quiet ones. I want Rizzo's world to evaporate around him before he even knows there's a storm. I want him isolated. I will deal with him myself." "Understood, boss." "Where is he now?" "You have 1 hour to find out and text me the address," Julian commanded. "And bring the sedan to the front of Illinois Corvo. Now. We are taking the girl home." He hung up without waiting for a reply. He turned back to the table. Lena was on her feet, looking lost and overwhelmed. The maître d' was hovering nearby, wringing his hands. Julian walked to her. "Come," he said simply. "I'm taking you home." She flinched, a new wave of fear in her eyes. I don't." He understood. He was a stranger, a powerful, dangerous man making impossible promises. He softened his voice, a feat that took more effort than ordering a man's destruction. "Your sister is waiting for you. You should not be alone tonight." He looked at her, and his eyes held a truth she couldn't possibly comprehend, but could feel. "Your mother sent me," he said, repeating her own words back to her. This time, they weren't a desperate plea. They were a statement of fact. The plan was not a plan. It was a demolition. While Julian's black sedan cut silently through the city streets with Lena in the passenger seat, a ghost army was already on the move. They were men who worked on the docks, men who could unload a container ship in the dead of night with no paperwork. They were men who ran his construction sites, men who knew how to deconstruct a building just as well as they could build one. They were quiet, efficient, and utterly loyal. They moved not with the clumsy brutality of street thugs, but with the coordinated precision of a military unit. The first to be visited was Rico the Hammer Fanucci, Rizzo's primary enforcer. Rico was at a dingy sports bar, watching a game and drinking cheap whiskey. 2 of Julian's men entered. They didn't pull guns. They didn't raise their voices. One of them, a bricklayer named Anthony, simply sat next to him. He showed Rico a photo on his phone. It was a live feed from a security camera showing Rico's wife and 2 young daughters eating ice cream in their suburban kitchen. The camera angle was from inside the house. "You're retired, Rico," Anthony said quietly. "Effective immediately. You're going to take your family on a very long vacation. You will never contact Sal Rizzo again. You will never collect a debt again. Do you understand?" Rico, a man who broke legs for a living, turned the color of ash. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He was gone from the bar in 30 seconds. The second target was Rizzo's ledger. It wasn't a physical book. Rizzo thought he was clever. It was on a protected server, managed by a freelance hacker who worked out of a basement apartment. Marco's nephew, a prodigy who had been recruited by government agencies before Julian offered him a more lucrative career, didn't even have to leave his high-tech loft. He breached the server in under 4 minutes. He downloaded the files, a comprehensive list of every victim, every inflated debt. Then, he wiped the server clean. And for good measure, he rerouted the hacker's IP address through 3 different federal watch lists. The hacker's front door was kicked in by men in windbreakers an hour later. Simultaneously, other teams moved on Rizzo's smaller collectors. They were picked up one by one. A quiet conversation in a parking garage. A sudden, non-negotiable offer to relocate to another city. A reminder of their own families, their own vulnerabilities. Within an hour, Sal Rizzo's entire support structure had ceased to exist. His enforcers were gone. His records were erased. His collectors had vanished. He was an island, completely alone, and he didn't even know it yet. Julian's phone vibrated. A text from Marco. An address for a seedy back-office operation above a pawn shop in an industrial district. Rizzo's headquarters. Julian had just pulled up in front of Lena's rundown apartment building. The contrast between the gleaming luxury of the car and the crumbling brick facade was stark. He turned to her. "Stay inside tonight," he said. "Lock your door. Don't answer it for anyone but me." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Julian's face was unreadable, the mask of the ghost firmly back in place. "I'm going to collect a debt." He waited until she was safely inside her building before he put the car in drive. The sedan moved back into the night, a predator heading toward its prey. Sal Rizzo was celebrating. He had a bottle of overpriced champagne on his desk, next to a pile of cash he had collected earlier. He was feeling good. The waitress girl, Lena, was due to pay up tomorrow. He knew she couldn't. He was looking forward to paying her and her little sister a visit. Fear was a better currency than cash. It paid interest forever. His office door opened. Rizzo looked up, annoyed. "What?" "I told you not to bother me." It wasn't one of his men. It was a tall, older man in an impeccably tailored suit. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a grimy office smelling of stale cigars. Behind him, another man, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, closed the door. The click of the lock was unnervingly loud. "Who the hell are you?" Rizzo blustered, trying to project an authority he did not feel. "This is a private office." The man walked forward, his movements calm and deliberate. He looked around the room with an expression of faint distaste. "Salvatore Rizzo," the man said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "They call you the weasel, it's an insult to the animal." Rizzo's bravado began to crumble. He had lived his life in the city's shadows. He knew power when he saw it. And this man radiated it like a furnace. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you've got the wrong guy," Rizzo stammered, reaching for the phone on his desk. The second man, Marco, was there in a flash. His hand covered Rizzo's, his grip like a vice. "I wouldn't do that," Marco said, his voice a low growl. The older man stopped in front of the desk. He was Julian Marchetti. Rizzo didn't know the name, but he knew the legend. The ghost. The blood drained from Rizzo's face. It was like a petty thief being confronted by the god of the underworld. I don't understand, he whispered. I pay my dues. I stay in my lane. I have never crossed you. You understand nothing, Julian said, his eyes as cold as a winter grave. You operate on greed. You prey on the weak. You think that makes you a player. It makes you a parasite. Julian reached into his coat. Rizzo flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Julian placed a small, crumpled piece of paper on the desk. It was a receipt for children's medicine. He had found it in Lena's apartment, on the kitchen counter, when he had insisted on checking to make sure her sister was all right. A girl named Lena, Julian said softly. A sister named Sophia. Does that name ring a bell? Rizzo was sweating profusely now, his cheap suit soaked. It's just business, he pleaded. She owes me money. That's all. You went to her home, Julian continued, his voice a relentless, quiet hammer. You threatened her sister. A sick child. Over a debt for this. He tapped the pharmacy receipt. My rules are very simple, Salvatore. I do not care what men like you do to each other. It is of no consequence to me. But you do not touch civilians. You do not threaten children. You broke the rule. Julian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But that's not why I'm here tonight. That's just business. This is personal. He paused, letting the fear marinate. 50 years ago, a woman lived in this city. She was kind. She baked bread. She helped a family in need, a family with a sick child. She made a promise that her son would look after them. Julian's eyes bored into Rizzo. Tonight, you put your filthy hands on that promise. You took something that did not belong to you. Not money. Something more valuable. He gestured to Marco. Get it. Marco reached into Rizzo's desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of Lena and a smiling young girl. Sophia. Rizzo had taken it as collateral. As a threat. Marco placed it on the desk next to the pharmacy receipt. Julian also had Marco retrieve Lena's promissory note, the document of her enslavement. He held it up. This is garbage, Julian said. He took a gold lighter from his pocket. He flicked it on, the flame a single, bright point in the dim office. He held the flame to the corner of the note. It caught, curling and blackening. He held it until the fire almost touched his fingers, then dropped the burning remains into Rizzo's champagne glass. The ashes fizzled and died. Her debt is paid, Julian said. He picked up the small photograph of the two sisters. He looked at it for a long moment, then carefully tucked it into his breast pocket. He turned to leave. Wait, Rizzo cried out, a desperate, pathetic sound. What are you going to do to me? Julian stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. Me? I'm not going to do anything to you. He looked at Marco. A slight nod. But the families of the people you've ruined? The husbands whose wives you terrorized? The parents whose children you threatened? They're going to find out your business has been closed. Permanently. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Marco followed, closing the door behind him. The narrative of Sal Rizzo's life had been edited. His chapter was over. The problem was solved. Permanently. He would not be bothering anyone ever again. The drive back to Lena's neighborhood was quiet. The city lights blurred past, a smear of color against the dark glass. Julian didn't go straight to her apartment. Instead, he parked a block away, in front of a small, all-night diner. He returned a few minutes later with a paper bag. He knocked on her door. After a moment, he heard the scraping of a chain, the click of multiple locks. The door opened a crack. Lena peered out, her face pale with anxiety. When she saw him, relief washed over her, so potent it was almost a physical force. She opened the door fully. He stepped inside. The apartment was tiny, but it was clean. A small child's drawings were taped to the refrigerator. A little girl with big, curious eyes was peeking from behind a worn-out armchair. Sophia. Julian's gaze softened. He handed the paper bag to Lena. For you and your sister, he said. Inside was soup, warm bread, and 2 cartons of milk. Simple food. Honest food. The kind of food his mother used to make. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out the small photograph. He handed it to her. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She took it, her fingers tracing the image of her sister. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were tears of relief. He's gone, she whispered. He will not trouble you again, Julian confirmed. His business is closed. He then held out a thick envelope. This is for the medicine. And for the rent. And for a new start. Find a better place to live. A safer place. Lena stared at the envelope, then back at him, shaking her head. No. I can't. I can never repay you. This is too much. You already have, Julian said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. You brought me a message. You gave me something worth more than money. He wasn't just talking about the connection to his mother. He was talking about the feeling that was settling in his chest. A feeling he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Purpose. Not the cold purpose of maintaining an empire, but the warm, vital purpose of protecting someone. Of doing a good deed. A seed, planting itself. Lena looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. She saw the expensive suit, the powerful car outside, the aura of danger that clung to him like a shroud. And she saw the kindness in his eyes. The two things did not seem to belong in the same person. Who are you? She asked, the question raw and honest. Are you a good man? Julian was silent for a long moment. He looked past her, at the drawing of a smiling sun on the refrigerator. He thought of his mother, of her hopes for him. He thought of the man he had become, the things he had done. The chasm between the two seemed infinite. But tonight, for a few short hours, he had stood on the other side of it. He finally met her gaze. My mother hoped I would be, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. Tonight, you let me believe she was right. It was the most honest thing he had said in decades. He turned to go. At the door, he paused. He took out a simple, stark white business card from his wallet. There was no name, no company. Just a single phone number embossed in black. If you or your sister ever need anything, he said, pressing the card into her hand. Anything at all. You call this number. They will find me. He didn't wait for a thank you. He simply walked out, closing the door gently behind him. Lena was left standing in her small apartment, holding a new beginning in one hand and a lifeline in the other, the smell of warm bread filling the air. 2 years passed. The city went on, its rhythms unchanged. The criminal underworld still operated by Julian Marchetti's rules. Problems still disappeared. The ghost was still a name spoken in whispers. But something in him had shifted. A small corner of his cold, ordered world had been given over to something else. On a sunny afternoon, in a quiet, tree-lined street far from the grime of her old life, Lena wiped down the counter of her own small shop. The sign above the door, painted in cheerful blue letters, read, Isabella's Bakery. The air inside smelled of yeast, sugar, and melting butter. It was a place of warmth and light. At a small table near the window, a young girl of about 10 sat drawing in a sketchbook. Sophia. She was healthy, bright-eyed, and full of life. Her drawing was of a smiling woman handing a loaf of bread to another woman. A story her older sister had told her many times. The bell above the door chimed, and a customer came in, a young mother with her child. Lena smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. She had used the money Julian gave her to not only move, but to enroll in a culinary course. She had learned the art of baking. She honored the memory of one stranger's kindness by creating a place that dispensed her own. She often gave away the day's leftovers to a local shelter. Kindness is not a debt. It's a seed. She was planting it every day. Miles away, in a stark, minimalist office atop a skyscraper overlooking the city, Julian Marchetti sat at his vast mahogany desk. Papers detailing multi-million-dollar transactions and shipping manifests lay in neat piles. His world was still one of numbers and power, of logistics and control. But on the corner of his desk, in a place of honor, sat two small, framed photographs. One was a faded black and white picture from 1975. A beautiful woman with dark, kind eyes, her hands dusted with flour. Isabella. Next to it was a newer photograph, a cheap, slightly worn print he had taken from a loan shark's office. Two sisters, one with tired eyes and one with a hopeful smile. Lena and Sophia. Marco entered the office, placing a folder on the desk. He glanced at the two photographs, a sight he was now used to. He no longer questioned it. He understood. Julian didn't look up from his work. "Is there a problem at the bakery?" he asked. It was the first question he always asked when Marco entered. "No, boss," Marco replied. "All quiet." The landlord fixed the leaky faucet. The supplier delivered the flour on time. The girl, Sophia, got an A on her art project. Julian nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. His men kept a silent, invisible watch over the bakery. Not as guards, but as guardians. They ensured that the little bubble of light Lena had created would never be touched by the darkness of the world outside. It was the most important operation he was running. It was a simple story, in the end. A story of a promise kept across the decades, a message delivered from a ghost by an angel in a waitress uniform. It was a reminder that true strength isn't found in the ability to destroy, but in the choice to protect. It proved that even in a world of shadows and steel, a single act of kindness, a memory of a mother's love, could be the most powerful force of all. For a man who had everything, a man who ruled a city, had been given the one thing he could never buy, a chance to be the good man his mother always knew he was. And in the quiet of his office, surrounded by the trappings of his dark empire, Julian Marchetti finally understood that the most valuable territory he had ever claimed was a small, sunlit bakery named Isabella's.